starting off these videos because it feels weird. You hit record and then you just start talking. I'm Charlie Sauer. I am the president of the Market Institute and the editor of U.S. Policy. This video is sponsored by the Market Institute Foundation, and I am here today with Jay Kimpton. Jay's somebody I've known now, I don't know, 7 years.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is if you look back at the timeline of Jay started kind of revolutionizing free market healthcare about 9 years ago. So it had just started growing and he was still kind of figuring out what was happening when I met him. So let's start off. Let's explain who you are and your business, and then we'll go back to what happened 9 years ago.
Sure, yeah. Charlie, I'm Jay Kimpton. I'm the owner and CEO of the Kempton Group Administrators. We're an independent third-party administration company in Oklahoma City. We work with self-funded employers that have chosen to then fund their employees' medical claims directly out of their company assets and hopefully help them manage their health plan costs.
All right, so 9 years ago, I don't know whether you stumbled across
a dark time in my life, in my business, really.
Yeah. It was, why?
It wasn't that we weren't profitable. I was just at a point in my career where I didn't feel like I was able to help my employers. You know, every cost would continue to go up. I was hired and I told my customers that I was there to help them manage their health plan costs, their employees' medical costs. And in my world, it got to a point where if the costs were going up by less than 10% a year, you would high-five your client and say, look what a great job I did for you.
Yeah.
When even inside you know that this, if that's the definition of success, I don't know that this is where I want to be anymore. It just, because it hurts real people. It hurts employees. They don't get it. The cost to employ them goes up every single year, but they may never see it in a paycheck. And I was party to that, and I just didn't really want to be party to that anymore about 10 years ago.
And on a parallel track was Dr. Keith Smith, an anesthesiologist in Oklahoma, who runs the Surgery Center of Oklahoma, and he was kind of facing the same dilemmas. He was charging people what he thought was a fair price, and people weren't coming to his surgery center.
Right.
And he got frustrated and put his prices online. That sounds kind of, maybe kind of weird now, but it was revolutionary and nobody had done it. But what I find interesting is he posted the prices online and it said, if you build it, they will come moment. And he was frustrated, put his prices online, and nobody really came through his door. He got a couple of phone calls, I think, from Canada.
Yep.
But then you guys met. How did this happen?
Right. Well, I was, again, in that kind of a dark place in my career and was holding a user group meeting where we bring a bunch of clients in and kind of talk to them about what's going on in healthcare. And I was starting to layer in some of these doldrums that I was feeling and frustration that I was feeling with the industry. You're supposed to give uplifting talks to your clients. This wasn't one of them, but this is how I felt. And by the end of that conversation, when everybody was kind of breaking up, I had one of my clients come up to me and say, you know, there's somebody you need to meet. They talk just like you. They have the same frustrations, but they're actually not on the insurance side. It's an anesthesiologist, it's a facility manager, and you've got to meet them. And it was actually one of my clients' neighbors was Dr. Keith Smith. And so we made an appointment, went over and met him, and it really changed that moment changed the trajectory of my career and then also Surgery Center of Oklahoma's. And honestly, it was a big domino that flipped over and caused a lot of other things to change as well.
Now, the prices Keith was charging and the prices he had posted were, what, about 20% maybe of what you were paying to hospitals?
Or even less.
And so you didn't trust him?
I didn't. I thought there was got to be a catch somewhere.
And so what happened next? You have Kimpton, and that was your dad's company. So you don't risk your whole company on somebody who's charging 10% or 20% of what the hospital's charging. So what did you do before just jumping in with Keith?
Well, I learned a little bit more about how the surgery center worked, and interestingly enough, I also learned about, because we, as a third-party administration company, we did business with Surgery Center of Oklahoma. But we did business with Surgery Center of Oklahoma through one of these third-party preferred provider organizations that does the negotiation on behalf of employers. And after spending some time with Dr. Smith, he had said, yeah, those guys, they come in here and they slide a fee schedule across the table. And many times the fee schedule that they slide across to me, that's, take it or leave it, is actually higher. The price is higher than what I would naturally charge on a market-based rate. In other words, they're forcing me to gouge employees and patients.
So you check out his business, everything checks out, the prices check out, people have been paying him, he's been honoring it. I think at that point, maybe for a couple of years in there, he had a 0% infection rate, which is
I think he still does.
Lower than everybody.
Right.
I don't even know how to ask this question, because to me, this is the turning point. This is, it's interesting. So you started sending people to Keith. How did you do that, and how did that look like?
Well, he, as you had mentioned earlier, he had these, really his market-based prices. He had insurance contracts back. He doesn't now, but he did then. He had insurance contracts, but he reserved his best pricing for cash customers. Somebody that could walk in and write him a check for the full amount. His prices were bundled as well, so they're kind of commensurate with a cash buyer. The anesthesia, the surgeon, the facility, if there was any pathology, radiology that was required for the surgical procedure that they offered, it was all bundled into one unit price. And so it was really good for somebody that could just write a check. Most of my clients, they can't write a check for a $13,000 hysterectomy, even though that might be a great price, and it might be $20,000 or $50,000 at a large hospital system. So we had to, and it was essentially done on a handshake. We had to modify our employers' self-funded benefit plans to create what we called a 100% benefit tier. And what really that meant was if the employee chose voluntarily to use Surgery Center of Oklahoma, the employer's plan administered through us, we would just write a check for the entire amount, waive the patient's deductible, waive their co-insurance. That the employee had zero cost. The employer just wrote a check, and they were very much able to do that and really take advantage of that amazing pricing that they offered.
$0 copays for big hysterectomies, for big surgeries. Now, one of the ways that Keith has this excellent tier is the cash payment.
Right.
You weren't used to that, so you created this 100% tier so you could get the cash payment off. I know that also the bundled prices didn't come with codes, and kind of everything that went through your system was codes. I'm sure that was a part of the 0 tier, but can you talk about kind of maybe how coding slowed Keith down, or what he did to code, and then what you had to do to overcome that?
Sure. Well, we had to evaluate. We didn't just walk in the door and say, "Hey, we're going to start buying from you." We did some pretty in-depth analysis to make sure that what Surgery Center of Oklahoma was offering on a bundled basis was in the best interest of. In other words, it was cheaper than where my employers had been buying before, and so we had to be able to compare. Well, if you're comparing a bundle like Surgery Center of Oklahoma had, and I called their bundles kind of a logical bundle because they weren't based on any coding that is out there right now. You don't have a unit of care that is really described anywhere else through either DRG or CPT. Most of y'all probably don't know what that means, but there is no coding that describes a logical unit of care, like what does it cost to get my knee scoped, all in, all done. So we did have to work with Surgery Center of Oklahoma quite a bit to describe, okay, what's in this bundle again?
Yeah.
And he was able to just verbalize, well, that includes this and this and this and this, and then we went back and then had to dig into our claim system, pull out all of the codes that we were buying from in a really disjointed fashion from the big hospital systems and do a comparison. We essentially synthesized a methodology to compare a logical care unit to the disjointed world that is the status quo. And when we drew that comparison, we found that the pricing was so good at Surgery Center of Oklahoma that, by golly, we're going to figure out a way to operationalize this and really promote this to our employers, because the pricing was 70–80% less than what they've been paying before. And the other thing we haven't really mentioned about is many of the surgical partners that operate at Surgery Center of Oklahoma, our clients were already using them because those surgeons also did procedures at some of the big hospital systems in town. So we already knew that they were of high quality.
That, to me, so I work with inventors around the country a lot. And one of the things I like talking to inventors about is what's the problem that they solve. So a lot of people have ideas. And so we could say that this was Keith's idea to be free market and your idea to be free market. But to me, it's what problems were solved to bring this thing. And so I find this coding solution to be, that's the thing to me that actually unleashed kind of this free market thing. And now people come and talk to me about new bundled pricing ideas.
Right.
And and that's, I think, where I want to go. So this was 9 years ago, 2011. We're now in 2020. What does your free market practice look like, and what does the overall market look like now?
Yeah. Well, at the Kempton Group, we now, as opposed to doing business with one free market surgery center, when Dr. Smith and I started doing business together, the market was kind of unleashed. About 3 months after we started doing business together, we got a phone call from another medical provider that was tired of losing business to Surgery Center of Oklahoma. And they were upset, and they didn't know what was happening to them. And I explained to them what was happening to them is that they were being competed against and losing. And they responded and came out with their own bundled cash pricing for the medical procedures that they wanted to try to sell to self-funded employers. That story has repeated itself, at least for our company. We're doing business now with over about 150 facilities now that are operating or competing with what started off with Surgery Center of Oklahoma. On a monthly basis, we have patients of our clients that will call us and say that, well, I was just at the doctor's office and they told me I'm going to have ankle surgery, or I'm going to have a cardiac stent, or whatever. As long as it's non-emergent, we want them to give us a call, and then we make them aware of what's offered out there on the free market. Again, it's bundled, it's paid at 100% by the employer, and generally the outcome is also guaranteed. So if there's any sort of a complication related to the procedure, it's on the medical provider's nickel. It's on their nickel, and that doesn't happen in healthcare today. So because of that, we're seeing about 800 patients that are voluntarily redirecting away from, say, an employed physician in a large hospital system to one of these free market providers every month.
Wow.
So what started off as just a little thing, for us, it's a big chunk of what our business is about now. So,
and I mean, the same thing has been happening with Keith too. He's now getting calls from around the country and signing up different groups as well. Where do you see, let's say, no government action? Where do you see the market in the next 10 years?
I think it's going to be huge. I really do. In fact, I think that insurance companies will ultimately be forced, without government intervention, they'll be forced to kind of start to deleverage their own networks and start accessing free market medical providers. And the reason is because I think the employers, the buyers of healthcare, the patients and employers, they're going to demand it. With government intervention, you didn't ask me that, but with government intervention, what we're very afraid of is that if transparency, if trying to take what naturally occurred here and put it into a regulation occurs, it'll ultimately end up giving cover to the medical world, where they can say, well, we met this regulation, so now we're transparent.
False transparency.
Exactly. The race is on right now to redefine transparency and redefine what it means to be a free market provider. And I mean, free market and transparency is defined. It should be defined by the buyer and the seller, not by a third party.
Yeah, that's the you're also a co-founder of the Free Market Medical Association, and I spoke at the first one and put a video up on the board that was a shirtless guy dancing. I don't know if you've seen it. I'll put the link in the description.
It's a classic.
But to me at the time, it was Keith out dancing. The further we've moved on, it's you and Keith that were these kind of crazy guys by themselves doing their thing. In the video, it goes from that one guy to kind of everybody in the stadium or the field dancing. Where are we in that? Do we have the first couple of people are around you, or is it getting crazy?
It's getting crazy. It really is. Pretty much every competitor that I have is doing some form of free market healthcare now. Also, for instance, Dr. Smith, he has a lot of competitors, which I just mentioned, and they're really, they're from coast to coast. Yeah. Probably the common denominator, though, that if I was going to draw any sort of a distinction or highlight something, most of the sellers, the free market medical providers that are in this space, they generally tend to be physician-owned facilities. We haven't seen the Wall Street-owned facilities really get into this game yet. Honestly, the status quo is just fine for them. It's very profitable right now. And then, on the buyer side, every single new customer that we get, the reason that they picked up the phone and called us or found us on the web is because they were researching free market healthcare, healthcare transparency, et cetera. And so it's growing very, very rapidly, and the market's alive and well in this space.
Well, thank you for coming to DC. Thank you for this. If you want more of this, please be sure to like this video and subscribe, and we will have more coming soon.